Hello, welcome to this VR to the tag Halloween Party Decks. April from Tarot and Witchery tagged me to do this, so thank you very much, April. This seems like a lot of fun. I will, of course, link the original video from April in the description box below. And let's get started. So there are, let's see here, 12 prompts. And the first prompt for this tag is the perfect host, the deck that sets everything up perfectly for you in a read. And I chose the Light Seers Pocket Tarot in a tin. And I don't really talk about Light Seers a lot or much at all. I mean, this is like one of those decks where I think like when it first came out, you just saw it everywhere, all over, the socials, all up in YouTube. And it became this thing where people just grew kind of sick of seeing it, myself included. And I feel like it's become one of those decks that like people don't want to like, but they do, for the very fact that it is just a fluid reader. I have heard this time and time again from just different people who broke down and just went ahead and took a chance on the deck and found that like while this isn't like aesthetically their thing, they don't want to like it, that they do because it just reads really well. So this is one that I actually haven't even picked up for a while to use, but I would have no qualms using this to read for others, even after like a long hiatus of not using it, because it just reads so fluidly and smoothly. The cards just give you everything you need. And so in that way, I feel as if, yeah, this is just one of those decks that does set you up for a pretty seamless read. The next prompt is Party Decor, the deck that's all about the aesthetic of Halloween. For this one, I chose the Darkwood Tarot because to me, this is a deck that totally gives Halloween aesthetic vibes for me. Just all of the, witches and vampires and the black cats. Like 100% Halloween aesthetic. And actually, this is the deck that I currently have out on my reading table. And like, oh gosh, like all these little creases. I've used this quite a bit. So number 3, comfort food. The deck that always satisfies, leaving you feeling good. My selection for this prompt is the Kawaii Tarot. And I actually do have some images to show, like if we're talking about like the premise of comfort food, quite literally, there are comfort foods that are featured in this deck. That I would certainly use to like eat my feelings. Desserts, you have like teacups and a lot of like desserts and such. And so, so in that way, I think that serves well for this prompt. But, aside from that, like this is just for me, like a hug deck. It is like a good mood, happy deck. So if ever I am feeling blue or cranky or low vibe, this deck really helps to inevitably like lift my spirits, put me in a better headspace, like put me in a better mood, put a smile on my face. Next prompt is Bobbing for Apples, the deck that's hit or miss. Sometimes it's right on, and other times you're left empty-handed. So this has only recently started happening with this deck, which is why I chose it for this prompt, and that is the Align Heart Affirmations deck. And nothing wrong with this deck. I've had emotional card pulls with this deck. I just think that a deck of this nature that is affirmation based can ultimately be hit or miss, and it's only been just with the a couple of recent pulls that I left with a message that didn't like necessarily resonate. And did I even pull out the ones? Yeah. So I just have a few examples here, but essentially this this is like an affirmations based deck where they are meant to serve as gentle reminders or even sentiments that like you want to cultivate. It's not necessarily something that is your current mindset or that you currently feel, but that that you want to cultivate, and so you use this heart here to actually like download the message. You put your thumb on it, you're just like download the message, be receptive to the message. So I don't pull this out all the time. I pull it out when I feel like it is something that would do me good to have these more of affirming messages. So essentially when I'm feeling like shit, this is when I pull out this deck. And it's not something where I do even like a daily pull. I think that's too much personally for me for this deck. So at the very most, it'd be like once a week. But it was only just recently that I pulled out this deck again. And so the messages that didn't land for me, so for instance, this one, you hide because you want to be found. This one did not necessarily resonate. I just felt like this did not pertain to me. Like this is not the type of baggage that I actually do feel I have. I got me some baggage, don't get me wrong, but like not in this way. So that one kind of left me empty-handed. And then like, this is the moment I've been waiting for. Again, didn't resonate at the time that I pulled it. And then this one, all is well, which again, it's one of those messages that you want to cultivate and you want to kind of bring into fruition. And even with that intention, like this was just not the message for me at the time. Prompt number 5, Werewolf Costume, the deck that brings transformation. So I feel like I could pick any of my decks to answer this particular prompt. I think that transformative readings can happen with any deck. If we're talking, say, kind of like bigger energy transformation or like connecting with your higher self, like that kind of vibe, I would go for Spirit Keeper's Tarot. And don't get me wrong, I have used this for more mundane, like everyday readings. Like for instance, the last time I used this deck for a reading was when trying to decide what to do for my birthday. I was getting a lot of encouragement from people to get together, have like a group thing, that the company would be really good for me. Given that I anticipated it was going to be like a hard birthday for me and just a day of like more grief and mourning. And so I thought, oh, maybe that would be a good idea. Like maybe, and I couldn't decide what to do, whether to be in my feelings and have more of a solitary birthday, or that it would be good for me to like, hang out with people. And this reading brought some much needed validation to what I was leaning toward. Anyway, but that's beside the point. That is just to say, like this is a deck that is kind of like I use at any point in time. But I think in terms of like say like bigger, like larger scale readings, like deeper questions, I think that this deck would be great for that because this deck has 3, not 1, but 3 significator cards that you could use to, depending on what you are seeking, the answer that you are seeking, you can pick your specific significator to better channel that type of answer in your reading, to channel that more specific reading and type of insight that you're seeking. So in that way, I just feel like this is, this is the real deal. And I think that would be a great type of, this would be a great deck for that type of reading where you're seeking that type of larger transformation. Next, we have the Vampire Costume, the deck that you can only do a few cards lest you feel drained. Honestly, the first thing that came to mind when contemplating this prompt wasn't so much like a specific deck as it was like a type of deck, which are pip decks. And so I'll just show this deck, which is out of print. It is called Tarot of the Heart. That's the translated title of this Korean themed deck. But for me, like I'm much more comfortable with pip decks than I used to be, and especially if I'm going to be using the pip deck that I designed for myself, that's like completely easy read because I made that deck. So it's really interesting, like, but when it comes to other pip decks, just I think in general, it just takes a little more mental energy for me when looking at pip decks. And so I tend to, when using pips, I tend to keep the readings like with fewer cards. Smaller number of cards, the better, unless we're doing like a very specific type of spread that can help me to better focus. That's different. But like if I'm doing, say, like a freestyle reading where I just throw down however many cards, your girl isn't going to be throwing down like 7 or 8 cards because that's just it's going to take me a little longer for my brain to internalize, and I'm impatient. I'm oftentimes just too impatient for that. Next prompt is Ghostly Apparition, the deck that disappears and shows up unexpectedly in your collection. So I don't really have decks like that. I mean, if they disappear, it's simply just because they got buried under all the other decks. So it's not that type of like disappearing act, if you will. But I do have a deck that I feel has the reputation, or at least from what other content creators and other tarot readers who have owned this deck say about it, which is that it does kind of have that trickster energy to it, and that is the Fairies Oracle by Brian Froud. This is definitely like a deck that I've just gone back and forth on getting, and then I just finally decided to go ahead. I've seen a lot on like so many people's channels, and I'm always like tempted, but then I just, for whatever reason, wouldn't get it. Like I see it a lot on Tikan's channel, and then I think it was a rumors video that made me just pull the trigger finally, just to like once and for all see if this deck is one that would work for me. I've just heard like people talk about how like this deck kind of disappears on them and then will reappear. Like many other people have said, like I really truly despise this font. I don't work a lot with like Fae energy. I will say that like, and as you can see, this is still in order because I haven't worked with it at all. But I will say that like a lot of the images, several of the images do speak to how I would envision Fae, or like my preferred aesthetic of Fae, maybe. So like these are really interesting here. But if we actually get to like, see, then you have images like this, like I'm not about this. and I'm really not about this. But I am about this. Like, yeah. Wow. I feel really bad for her back and shoulders. Um, okay. And then, yeah, like this, like, I don't know. I don't know. So yeah, I'll be very interested in seeing how I get on with this because again, some of it's like really appealing and then others just kind of don't necessarily land. But which is not to say, I mean, just because that's the case from like initial impressions, it's really about how, yeah, it'll work in a reading. And I hear the guidebook is also very good. So like that's cool. I like that. I like him. Yeah, okay, so I will try to keep you posted on that. Next prompt, zombie costume, your deck in tatters. This deck I've shown ad nauseum. And I mean, that really lends to the fact that I have used this quite a bit. But interestingly, like, I wouldn't say it's in tatters from just like a fading image perspective. I feel like this card is still in pretty decent condition. It's the Everyday Witch. I would say it just looks really ratty from like a edging standpoint. You can see that I've shuffled it and used it quite a bit. It's had quite a bit of wear, but I will say like the images themselves are in decent condition. This, for all the times I have used this deck, I haven't creased this one. Like this has really held up as a Llewellyn deck that a lot of people shit on in terms of cardstock. I think that this has held up quite well. But at the risk of always showing that deck, I do have another deck to show. I mean, I just really don't have a lot of decks at all that I would deem in tatters, but it's the Murder of Crows, and I do have some cards pulled out to show you. Like this deck, it's this low Scarabeo cardstock that comes in this type of box that I just need to remind myself to stay away from because I hate this cardstock. I just really hate it. And I don't know if you can see, so like, yeah, just really creased up in certain cards. And that bothers me. Like here, I don't know if you can see that because it's kind of glossy, but like I just like they're just like creases. And I don't know, I just don't feel like I'm that rough on my decks, and yet they like have, you know, creases. Do any of you have this experience with Lo Scarabeo or maybe even this deck? Like it just kind of drives me bonkers. But I'm again trying to adopt the mindset that like it's fine. Just shows that you've been using it, which is great. And it's going to have that old worn-in look, and it's going to be awesome. But yeah, other than that, like I feel like this deck looks fairly decent. It's just like the creases. Julie from post recording and jumping in here to add in a prompt that I forgot, which is the Witchy Costume, your favorite witchy deck. So I've already shown Everyday Witch. That would probably have been my answer, but given that I already used that for the previous prompt, I'm going to go with Terror of the Cat People. I mean, I could have been on the nose and I could have chosen the Earthly Souls and Spirits Witch Oracle, Earthly Souls and Spirits Moon Oracle. I can never remember the name because all of the images are of witches. And as much as I like that deck, I wouldn't say it's a favorite, but here we do have another one of my ride or die kindred favorite decks. And this to me definitely has a very kind of witchy feel to it, just because, I don't know, you just get a lot of like, at least I do, I get a lot of like crone energy and like a lot of um, what I feel to be are like my interpretation of a lot of these figures are that they're elder figures, and with that, the whole just the whole progression of life where you reach that crone stage of your life where you have gained wisdom and you've gained knowledge and you've learned from mistakes, like, and all that culminates into, like, to me, what feels like a very kind of witchy vibe from a lot of these depictions. Like, I can see so many of these characters doing spell work. Like, I can imagine them indulging in witchery and just that kind of magical, mystical, um, I don't know, aura to them. That these would be skills that they would cultivate and use and practice. And so I would argue that this is a very witchy deck, or at least it is to me. Next prompt is Blood and Guts, the deck that cuts you to the core. Use at your own peril. This will probably be predictable. I gotta go with the Reclaim Oracle. That is the first deck that I thought of for this prompt. It's for the sheer fact that most, if not all, of my readings to date have been ones that just pull no punches. And it's merciless in the messages that it gives. Um, yeah, I don't know. It's like on the offset, like these images themselves, they're not like, they don't give off like a mean vibe. Um, and yet, uh, yeah, my readings have definitely been cutting. Uh, I would like to think that in the future we can cultivate a relationship that is not just about like kicking my ass. And I feel like I have heard other people say who've had this deck that it doesn't necessarily read like that for them. So that's encouraging. But at the very least, I know that if I want my ass kicked and if I want to be broken, like I can count on this deck to do that for me. The next prompt is Couples in Costume, the perfect pair of decks for the season. So I chose a pair that I recently had on my table in the earlier part of the month, and I felt like they worked really well together. Actually, it's more like a trio, but I like used them in pairs, and yeah. So the one is the Vampire's Tarot of the Eternal Night. This is out of print. And then you have the Lay Vampire Oracle by Jasmine Beckett Griffith. This is the deck that I had not ever previously used, so it's nice to try this one out. And I feel like, yeah, it actually paired really nicely with this deck. Sometimes I do like when decks are matchy-matchy. So I do have my Notorious JBG Tarot. So, I mean, I'm not opposed to using like a tarot and oracle by with images by the same creator. And then sometimes I don't want it to be matchy-matchy, and I feel like this is one of those instances where they still complement each other despite the aesthetic being a bit different. So I really enjoyed using these two together. And then I actually switched out the Lay Vampire with my my own DIY oracle. And so, you know, in the same vein, that turned out to be a really nice pairing as well. Um, you know, just different types of messages from the respective oracles, and I think both just really complemented the Vampire's Tarot of the Eternal Night. Final prompt is no costume, the no frills deck, like someone who refuses to dress up. For this, I selected the Moon Void Tarot, and I'm going to show both editions. So this is the second edition, and this is the third edition. I know that this is actually in print in French. And then this one, I'm not sure if this is out of print or not, but this is Stephanie Caponi's most recent iteration of this deck. But yeah, so this way would be more helpful, right? So it's certainly, I feel like between the two decks, you kind of get like two different moods. Like this one feels very like I feel like this pink one feels more mature, whereas this one is like a little more naive and vulnerable in some ways. But I love them both. And I've talked about on my channel before that Moon Void is a very reflective and contemplative deck for me. It does feel very no frills just because of like its more kind of everyday contemporary nature, the more like mundane renderings of the images. And I mean, speaking of like no costume, especially like this edition, the second edition, like she's naked a lot. The protagonist is naked quite a bit. Yeah, just very no costume, like and very vulnerable. And so I would categorize this as a deck that is very much no frills. You know, what you see is what you get. And that ends this tag. So if you stayed with me this entire time, I really appreciate you. And thank you to April again for tagging me to do the VR. I hope you all are well, and I will see you in the next video.